So please find your seats. And we are about to start in 3 minutes.
Say hello. I think we met via virtually a year ago. Roadshow from Unito, right? You made a quick presentation on the FSD at the time we were asking questions.
Good morning to all. I hope you have had a splendid morning. There are a lot of parallel sessions and a lot of interesting things happening at this hotel in these days. So we are about to start this panel on sustainable finance for investment and business. Actually, we have a large number. We actually stopped the registration because it was so crowded. So it could be that we expect a few more people to find their way to the room in the course of the session. If not, we will have the sharpest brains here, one who has a really, really strong key interest in these areas, and we will learn together. So we have this panel. This session is divided into 3 different parts. It will open the panel discussion on financial instruments available in Kenya. It will be moderated by Eva Rangiria. After that, it will be a short introduction to the EU instruments, European Fund for Sustainable Development. Yeah, it's a long and complicated name, but we will analyze it and break it down together here to learn what it is. At the end, it will be a panel discussion on greening finance, Kenya, EU, and our policies to get there. So this is what we have ahead of us for the next 2 hours or so. But to start with, I would like to invite the first panel and the first moderator. We have Ruggero Pietrafesa. No, he was the one who missed his flight. Sorry. We have Jan Willem Durf from EIB. Please take your seat. We have Michael France from Get Invest. And we have Marnix Monfort from FMO. Say it again. And Femke from Invest International. So this is a strong panel, and we're going to give a big hand for the first moderator, Eva Rangiria, who's going to walk us through this first hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming in to this session. This is the first session on sustainable finance for investment and business. Like Robert said, my name is Eva Rangiria, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the East Africa Private Equity and Venture Capital Association. And ours is the umbrella network for capital allocators in East Africa, with the mandate of creating an ecosystem that drives investment inflows into the region, supporting the financiers in understanding the market, supporting policymakers with building a better framework for investment to flow, and supporting the entrepreneurs in accessing capital and providing trainings that enhance their bankability. So it's a delight to be here with my panelists. I'm just going to shoot right from the person on my immediate left. Marnix, please introduce yourself and your firm, and then we'll get started.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Marnix Monfort, and I'm with the FMO, the Dutch Development Finance Institution, or the Entrepreneurial Development Bank, as we like to call it. I'm the Director for Financial Institutions and interim also for the Energy Department. So we work with banks, microfinance institutions, fintechs, etc., on employment, sustainability, and access to finance.
Thank you. Remke?
I have my own. Yeah, so there's clearly a strong Dutch-German link today, but my name is Femke Bos. I'm working for Invest International. I'm the Director Business Development Strategy and Impact, so that's a whole mouthful. We're a new institution established in October 2021, and we're supporting Dutch solutions for global challenges. So we are set up to finance Dutch companies or companies with a Dutch link in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We provide access to finance for those companies who also do joint ventures with local companies. But we also are managing quite a large government-to-government program for investments into public infrastructure and water in that specific sector.
Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Michael Franz. I'm team leader at Get Invest, and my story is actually, well, it's a German one in a way, but it's also an African European one, because my story started here in Kenya 16 years ago. I lived here for 6 years, and we understood back then there's a challenge in the market, linking those who need with those who have capital, and we have now built a solution for this, and I leave that little cliffhanger here and explain it later. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Jan-Willem Leur. I work for the European Investment Bank. I'm not sure if it's known to all of you. I hope so.
But we are invested in Kenya since the mid-70s. Our outstanding portfolio of lending is around 1.6 billion a year. I work for the regional hub, the European Investment Bank
here in Nairobi. We're covering 11 countries, and we are recruiting on a recruiting drive to employ a lot more local expertise.
Sustainability, these are meanings, but for us it also means that we are investing in local talent and making sure that we can more effectively do our business here in the region.
Thank you so much, Jan. So our panel is supposed to create linkages or be the first point of sustainable finance trickling into local businesses. So I just wanted to get a feel of the room. How many here are financiers? Say for the people on the panel. How many are entrepreneurs or people sourcing capital? There, you have the audience. How many are others?
Who's the rest? You know, yeah, students maybe. Government.
All right. Media. Got it. Thank you so much. So we have a feel of the room, panelists, and a lot of the hands went up when we talked about who's in the room raising capital, so you have an idea of your audience. And just to get started, one of the challenges, so I work in an ecosystem enabling role, and one of the challenges that we perpetually have to work with is how to get capital accessible. The genesis of why EUBC was formed. And Michael, you mentioned that it's part of the work you're doing. So you started with a cliffhanger, you ended with a cliffhanger. I want to start with that. What is Get It Europe?
Yes, so I'll tell you this as a story. So I started working here in Kenya, as I said, 15 years ago. That was the early days of green energy. The President mentioned that yesterday. It's now big. Back then it was not big, it was the early days. And we tried to support many companies to do projects. And we often ended up with the same challenge. The projects were asking, where's the money? How do I get to finance? And we talked to many financiers, and the financiers said, where are the projects? And then for many projects or companies that came to them, they said, these are not quite ready yet. Why can't you provide some support? But we didn't have anything, any good offer at the time. So I spent then the next couple of years building and now managing Get Invest. And that's a solution for just that problem, specific to the energy space, but I think there's a lot of structural similarities also to other sectors. So what is it? It's a European program. We're funded by the European Union and by several member states, by Germany, by the Netherlands, by Sweden, and by Austria.
And so it's basically a Team Europe approach, Europe coming together and providing a good solution for what the market needs. We're also part of the Global Gateway, and the EU has now designated us, Get Invest, to be a one-stop shop, if you will. So anybody who is looking for funding or other types of support from European sources, it's our role to help orient and point you in the right direction and help you get access. You can, of course, also go directly to the different institutions, but our offer is basically complementary and meant to help pave the way. So what does that mean? And I'm speaking now here to the entrepreneurs in the room, because it's you who would have to knock at our door and say, this is us, this is what we do. And then we would do a brief check, and there's a little bit of paperwork, but we try to keep it short. And then we can advise you and support you how to raise capital from whichever source, whichever type of capital is most appropriate to you, to your needs, and to what the financiers have on offer. Small reality check here, we cannot help everybody. There's a certain minimum viability, there are criteria that are there, but we are quite flexible. I really want to say that. And it's better to ask than to just assume that we can't support. I will say another thing. So my story started here in Kenya, and it didn't have an influence on how our portfolio developed. But I'm very proud to be able to tell you that of all the companies that we have supported now 350 transactions all over Africa and the Caribbean and the Pacific. 50 are from Kenya alone, and 16 of them we moved into financial close already. Yeah, so it's actually happening, it's working. We're building bridges to the financiers. I will also say this, that at the moment we have 180 clients all over Africa that we support. So there is quite a bit of experience here in the team. I will wrap it up here. In a nutshell, we're a project preparation facility, if you will. We're funded by the EU, we're part of Team Europe. We're open for business, so come to us. Thank you.
A window where people need to apply for? I'm just asking again for the people in the room.
Yeah, but for all intents, that's one of the things that we try to avoid. So one thing that I realized is that the paperwork is really killing sometimes, and entrepreneurs have different things on their mind than answer to call for proposals. So for all intents and purposes, there is no calls for proposals. Behind the scenes, we run cohorts, yes, but every 6 weeks we open and close cohorts. So, and if it's very urgent, we can talk. But we have our shortest response time was 2 days.
All right, and we will get back to him on what is a bankable project. But Michael talked about investing in energy, or having a focus rather on catalyzing energy projects. And I want to come to Fem because I know you also probably more diverse than energy. What is the criteria you look at when you're building the portfolio on who to support?
Yes, thank you. So actually we have supported about 10 SMEs currently in Kenya, all with, most of them with a Dutch-Kenyan sort of joint venture model or link, or a strong link with the Netherlands. Just to name an example is a small company called EB. They're introducing electronic bikes in Kenya. But they're also manufacturing and producing them in Kenya, so they're not being imported and then sold. No, it's really the assembly in Kenya, and they want to conquer the whole of East Africa. I mean, they're quite ambitious. Another company that we're financing is thank you. And that's a company called Pikes. They're setting up data centers in Africa, which is extremely important for the digital economy to thrive. And actually, that's another thing. In energy and climate, we are trying to find projects. That's more challenging, I have to say. Although there might be opportunities in waste to energy that we will look into in Kenya. But currently, we are trying to find what we can do there. But also with our public programs, so supporting governments, we are looking into opportunities to work with the Kenyan PPP unit and identify projects that we could take up together, either in water or in waste to energy or any of the other sectors. So yes, we're also open for business. Actually, that's my main message, and trying to find really our niche and the solutions. But we have a very strong impact focus, so that is important for us. So SDG 8 and 13. For those who are not familiar, 8 is by job creation, 13 is by climate action. So anything that is in there, we would very happy to look into.
Fantastic. So far I've had energy, I've had EVs, electric bikes, waste. So these are just some industries that these financiers are looking to back. So just keeping track on your behalf in case you're in that space. And I'm going to go to Jan Willem on the far end, because the EU is a big supporter of business, either directly or indirectly in Africa, and certainly a big driver of sustainable finance. What, in your experience at EIB, would you say has been the absorption rate of sustainable finance, at least on the continent? And now that you have presence here, how do you see it impacting the African continent, and especially Kenya, where you're based?
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer. I think in the sense that, look, you know, we're the climate bank. At least that's what we've decided to target 5 years ago. So by definition, all our lending activity, all our support has to be at least 50% climate focused. So in that sense, going forward, and over the last 10 years, we've seen that sustainability financing, you know, has gone from what used to be almost a novelty, has become mainstream. So it's you know, it's unthinkable this day, you know, current climate challenges, that this would change. So for us, sustainable financing and climate is our key driver. So you know, listening to President Ruto, his opening address yesterday, I think only confirmed that if you're in that space, you're also not just addressing the climate challenges, but you're also clearly and squarely in the priorities of the current government, which I think, you know, makes life a lot easier for us to do our business.
Fantastic. And one big driver of climate financing and cascading sustainable financing in Africa has been FMO for some time now, directly and indirectly. So maybe you can speak to what FMO is doing across the two. I don't have the funds, the bigger institutional banking, but what's FMO's drive for sustainable financing agenda in Africa at a corporate level and then through your clients?
Thank you very much. Indeed, we are already open for business in Kenya for 30 years and have now a portfolio of about 400 million spread over about 25 clients, I think. And we have been traditionally focusing on the agri, food and water sector, the renewable energy sector, which is now turning into, well, energy transition, solar home systems, etc., grid storage, and also financial institutions, which is perhaps our largest sector. So we've historically been involved in equity financing and debt financing, directly and via funds on the equity side and, well, financial institutions as intermediaries towards the SMEs on the debt side. So sustainable finance has always been a priority for us, green finance, and we hope that we will come apart from the project financings we've been involved in over the years, like for instance near Lake Turkana and others. Now also to do green bonds for agri companies as well as for financial institutions. So to have the sustainable finance also there. And it of course all starts with capacity building, helping companies to build their environmental and social risk management systems so that they can also filter their clients on that basis. Now what is new? What is new is that since 4 years the European Union launched the EFSD, the European Fund for Sustainable Development, and that allowed us to make certain programs. There are 2 themes that we're really working on. First is access to finance, and the second is sustainable finance. So sustainable finance is also for the more advanced companies. Access to finance is for the ones that are startup or scale-up companies. So this allowed us to build two programs. First is Ventures for early stage venture capital, either via funds, accelerators, incubators for the really small ones, or directly for the more substantial ones. And the other one is been the launch of our portfolio guarantee program for financial institutions called Nazira, which is now working in Kenya with 3 banks to offer credit risk guarantees, so that they can move from the more mature SMEs towards collateral-based to now also cash flow-based lending. So that is, of course, very important for those entrepreneurs that do not have a lot of collateral or not a long track record yet. And what we see now with EFSD Plus, which was launched late last year, we can build more programs, also for the agri side and for the energy side, to also offer guarantee products there, to avoid also the currency mismatch, to not come in with large foreign currency financings, which you never know in the end how much you will need to pay on it in shillings, but to also make that available via our intermediaries in local currency financing.
I will still pick up on where you left off, which is working with intermediaries. And for the audience in the room, sometimes getting access to the kind of capital on stage is rather challenging. But what we know is, we know commercial banks. They are right around the corner of every town or major city that we have in Kenya. So commercial banks tend to be the first point of access to finance, right? And FMO has been working with them. So how do you cascade some of the initiatives you're building at a global level, FMO, to ensure that you deliver on that access to finance mandate? Which are some of the institutions you're working with that the entrepreneur in the room can go and make reference to this conversation today? Just give us some detail around that.
Okay, we work with a number of financial institutions, and this is basically the question of the missing middle, which has of course been debated for decades, that there's always financing options for the large corporates, the large projects, and there's always financing for the real bottom of the pyramid via microfinance. But retail banking. But what about the in-between stage? That is, and we're trying to target that both by persuading the larger banks to come down, so to amend their skills, not just from investing in the large corporates, in treasury paper, but also SME financing, collateral-based, and then cash flow-based. And we work with former microfinance institutions that have now got banking license, so they can also raise deposits to make their lending skills for ever higher amounts also available to the SMEs. So that at some stage these two should meet and there should not be a missing middle anymore. And the Nazira program helps us to offer at least a credit risk protection, so that the banks will be more comfortable to lend to companies on more or should I less secured basis.
All right. And coming to you, Femke, you mentioned the missing middle, and it's a reality that we have here. How do you see Invest International, which, as you said, is relatively young, coming in to support the work the likes of FMO, EIB are doing, and others in the room? What is the complementary aspect that you feel like you bring to the continent?
Yes, well, what we can bring in, we're really looking at the ecosystem as well, so we know we're a subsidiary of FMO, so we know FMO is very, doing great work with local banks, but how can we fit in, what's our angle? And we're here in Kenya also to investigate whether we can set up a Dutch desk, so combined financing together with the knowledge to link also companies with the Netherlands. So that's one thing that we're setting up. We also have, provide blended finance instruments to make sure that these projects become more bankable. And I think we can, I have to start, talking to my colleague here on the right side, how we can really make sure that this is more catalyzed even more. So projects that are in an early phase, we can also support by providing development capital for the very early phases of a project to be developed. So that's something that we do. So we provide really tailor-made solutions to specific issues, but I think in general it is very important that the local financial system picks up these challenges in the end. And that is the most important part, because we can try to fill the gap, but it needs to also come from the local banks here, that they are encouraged to do more in sustainable finance and green finance in whatever shape or form. So instead of investing in T-bills, that they do start taking some more risk and are speeding up this transition to a more sustainable world. So that is, I think, crucial in the whole ecosystem, the financing ecosystem.
I can ask Michael this. How are you helping businesses that come to you look at the different that are available? I think every time you hit that, mine doesn't work.
I can switch your microphone off. It seems.
Yeah, but seriously.
Yeah.
So we've heard about what FMO is doing with local banks to catalyze local capital, and I think it's really important. It's one of the drivers for our work at EAVCA, mobilizing local capital. What are some of the products that you think we need in this market, and how are you helping the businesses that you're working with access the different products that are available?
I will ambush somebody in the audience a little bit and call out Jeff Murage here, because in another life, he was running a TA platform to help companies and projects get ready for financing.
He's now investing in infrastructure, no?
Exactly, he's still around. So basically, sorry Jeff, but sorry, what we do is we have put together a deal team of advisors that flexibly supports companies with what they need to get ready. It's technical assistance only. But I can unpack that a little bit. And let me start, because we talked here about the challenge of very early stage companies as well. There is often in our experience, we have learned that these companies sometimes lack really the legal structures, the entrepreneurial structures to even be, at a basic level ready for formal finance. For that, we have created a solution. We have a service that can help with that. The other services, and you can structure that, of course, in a different way, but this is the way how we have structured it, is the broad strategy outlook. Many entrepreneurs don't really know, because they're entrepreneurs. They're doing a business, they're running a business, but they're not financing specialists. So the bird's eye view, what is my strategy actually? On what capital will I need? How will I grow? That's support area 1. Support area 2, what's the business case actually look like? And what does the financial structure that goes with the business case look like? And what does a financial model look like? Because many of the funders, they will expect numbers. And these numbers, they need to be based on certain calculations that need to be at a certain level. And that is really where, actually we spend most of our money on that, most of the cost, because that's really expensive to get good experts on this. And then the other big questions that entrepreneurs are facing is, there seems to be an ocean of financing opportunities out there. For energy alone, just to give you a number that sounds a bit ridiculous, but we know of 300 different financing solutions that are available in Africa for green energy. How do I know which one is the one that I need? Who do I talk to? And will these people even pick up the phone when I call them? So we help with that. And then the last step is, once you have gone through that, once the introduction is made, you still need to negotiate. And that's when the heavy lifting comes. Here we actually really like to hand over to commercial transaction advisors, because at that point a financier should be interested enough to provide maybe some development capital to bring in external transaction advisors. So that's what we do. That's how we can pave the way for companies to access capital. That's how we greatly make it easier also and reduce the effort, the transaction costs for both sides, for both the financiers as well as for the entrepreneurs in the first place. And one thing I would like to stress is, because we talked also about capital types. Okay, in numbers, our average in our facility is 11 million euros ticket size, but the median is about 4 million. Yeah? That means we have a lot of relatively low ticket sizes, small ticket sizes. But that is good. One, because that's the missing middle. And two, our support with taxpayers' money, with European taxpayers' money as part of Team Europe, is supposed to be catalytic. Yeah? Allow companies to maybe take the first step, maybe the second step, and then maybe go it on their own. That's the idea.
From where you stopped, catalytic capital from Team Europe,
Yeah.
I want to bring in Jan William, just to see, I think we know the debt providers, we know the equity providers. Is there an opportunity for Team Europe to give grants? I know there's, especially for the missing middle and young companies, there's a lot of young companies that would benefit from grants and other forms of technical assistance. From where you sit as EIB, supporting not just big fund of funds, but also doing direct investments and into programs like ESFD. How do we get the needed operating capital, the bridging capital, into the small businesses in Kenya?
Yeah, that's, you're asking an institution that's doing 65 billion a year with 4,000 people. So, so by nature, the only way we can do that is by doing large ticket sizes. We do, of course, do corporate funding, and we do go to tickets or ticket size of say 10 million, 20 million investments. We only normally cover 50% of the investment. So the only way that we can really reach the middle group is through VC funds, through equity funds, loan funds that we are supporting. In fact, in Kenya alone, EIB supported Kenya-based funds to the tune of 66 million, and that is purely to support equity financing and debt financing, or quasi-equity financing in that space. And then, much like FMO as well, we provide, of course, credit lines to banks through support of EFSD Plus to de-risk some of their portfolio, so they can get into a lending space or a sector that they would normally not be able to lend in, because it would require too much capital reserve. So that is, unfortunately, I wish I had a different answer for you, but the EIB's financing is to SMEs is channeled through these intermediaries.
Michael, would you know anyone who's writing checks? Every time we do that, my mic goes off.
Just let that thing lie there now. I have two things to say to that. One, and I'm of course in the energy sector, so I'm quite aware of the landscape of financing instruments in the energy sector. There are specialized facilities for certain types of capital. There are grant facilities out there, and seed capital facilities out there. But now, and I say that on every panel that I can get on, where there's policymakers and decision makers in the room, and there are several here, capital as such, we need the right type of capital with the right modalities as well. And from what we see in hard numbers and hard evidence in our portfolio, that there is a severe shortage of clever seed capital and clever grants. There is a bad way of doing grants, and a lot of money has already been wasted in the past on grants, but there are good ways of doing grants as well. And there's not enough around to meet the needs, and it's really holding us back towards a lot more investments and broader investments, and also local entrepreneurship and local market development in the green energy space. And the second one that is really a big problem as we speak is that there's simply not enough equity out there. And it's a real problem. We have a lot of clients that could take on more capital, but they could take on more debt if they had more equity. But there's just nobody, or not nobody, but not enough financing institutions right now willing to provide equity, of course, at the right conditions as well. And this is a policy decision that needs to be made. Yeah? Of course, we're not calling for just throwing money after things that don't work. It is also difficult to do equity, but we need to adjust things a little bit. And I actually see some very positive developments on this in the new EFSD plus package and in the instruments that the DFIs are putting up based on that.
So I've seen a different problem where there's a lot of equity capital and not enough of the other form of capital.
Then I will talk to you later and
So
we'll figure that out.
I think everyone I see raising capital, at least from a venture fund, for a venture fund or a PE fund, it's equity. Private debt started, I think, in South Africa like 10 years ago. It's only now that we're seeing it in the rest of the continent. But maybe FMO is best placed to speak about that because for real, I feel like Africa has an influx of equity allocators, not enough of the rest. And one of the things I was wondering, to bring you from Care on board, do you write non-equity types of checks, or do you do both equity and grants as well as debt?
Right. No, so we do both equity, debt, and mezzanine structures, actually. The only thing we can't do is local currency funding. So we need to go through, I'm getting back to the local banks, really. They're so essential in the whole system because we can't do shilling directly. That's a challenge we have, We're looking into hedging mechanisms, but it makes it all very, very expensive doing that, So I wish we just had one currency. My God, that would be so easy just to,
As we speak about sustainable financing, the other option is local currency backing, and I'll put you on the spot. I know supporting fund-of-fund structures maybe is not your everyday job, but is there room for firms like FMO who back GPs as well to consider backing local currency providers as one way of building sustainable platforms?
To some extent there is, yeah. I think if you go further with this missing middle and you think which category is now still left, it's actually more the scale-ups than the startups. The startups will find ways, friends and family, up to a certain extent. But then when you get to scaling up, then it becomes harder to both find equity and debt until you reach these substantial amounts that lots of people become interested. And I think the best way is to become part of an ecosystem of incubators, accelerators, so that together on a consolidated basis, it does get a critical mass to progress further. What we have now is a ventures fund, which is already providing equity to some scale-up type, and especially in consolidated form. But I think the next level is what we call market creation. That we look at certain market imperfections, where are the bottlenecks, and how, not just by money, but also by capacity development, can we address those, sometimes also with government, to see where the obstructions are, and to come to local currency solutions, also partly with convertible grants, then preferably than just grants, to also help the scale-up type. But that is the hardest part of the missing middle to address. And I think now with the new EFSD Plus, especially if we also find a way to address local currency solutions, that could be a way forward for that last part that is still suffering from a shortage of supply.
That, and mine was mostly a challenge to my panelists, being people who sit in decision-making rooms of our DFIs, because the entrepreneur we want to support is earning from their own customers, the last retailer, in local currency. And until we are able to help them at least build a foundation in that level, it might be a bit of a challenge for even the people who are looking for commercial returns to make them, at least through hard currency, especially going through what we're going through in 2023. I have in mind, I think FST is in the room, and they've done something on the Africa local currency bond as an initiative to pool international allocators and get them to write local currency bonds. So that's one way that I find has worked for development finance partners to start blending local currency with hard currency. I'm aware we don't have much time, but as I draw to a close, again, drawing from the president's speech yesterday, green financing is going to be a very big subject of discussion in the short to medium term. And for some of us who are, say, in manufacturing or industrial, so not energy, not climate targeting, how do we start thinking about greening our institutions? And I can start with you because you're working with local banks to cascade that green financing agenda.
Yeah, and the topic of green financing has, of course, a risk side and an opportunity side. And I like to focus on the opportunity side, because the risk side with environmental and social risk management capacities and increasing legislation is a topic for a whole other seminar, I think. But on the opportunity side, I think greening the economy is in three ways. It allows you to reach the standards to export products. It's also a profiling thing, that if you are yourself a sustainable producer of things, you will be a preferred supplier, or sometimes it's even compulsory to be that way before you can have a business relationship with other parties. And so therefore what we have seen a lot is third, and that's not least, it allows certain pockets of financing to be available, because the EC is one way of providing blended finance, but there is, for instance, the Green Capital Fund, a UN institution, which also has lots of green financing or subsidies available for sustainable projects. So there's really also a financing incentive to have a sustainable way of running your business. So we try now for more of our intermediaries to issue green financing, which they in a way then also deploy towards companies in their markets that operate at the right sustainability level. And that sort of financing will then be interesting for all sorts of, also institutional investors. So you will mobilize a lot more money for the economy if you can route it via sustainable financing instruments. And I hope we will be able in the next 12 months or so to close the first green bond for a Kenyan bank.
Fantastic. For you, Femke, in your role as a strategy advisor, how do we start greening the
greening? Yeah. Well, actually, we identified, let's say, the next energy transition, which is all about hydrogen. So what we see is we've started together with climate fund managers a new fund that we will launch soon for the production of green hydrogen, and the African continent provides lots of opportunities for green hydrogen. So we started in Namibia. We're looking into opportunities in South Africa. And I also learned this week that Kenya also has an ambition to do more on green hydrogen. So actually we are using a lot of our, let's say, more grant focus to stimulate this sort of new transitional topic and source of green energy. To be financed, but in the very early stages where it's still not commercially a viable proposition, cannot be made yet in that sector, but it is an important part for us. On more established technologies, we look a lot into waste to energy, and that's also a topic I found on this conference to be returning, so there's a lot of need for that as well. So that's another segment. Furthermore, we do also on the public sector side more on coastal protection and water. I mean, water is a huge issue also in this country. It's on a global scale, and how to deal with water issues and improve the water situation. Those are sectors and projects that we're looking into as well.
Michael, how do you make the green conversation locally relevant? Because it's very easy to say, oh, well, we have to still build jobs in Africa. We still have to build our infrastructure. Climate is the last thing we need to think about in Africa.
This is a very interesting question. I, over my career, have answered it like this. I have 15 years worked on renewable energy, and I have only on rare occasions argued with climate change or with other environmental benefits which exist. Yeah, if you look at green power on the grid, electrifying villages with renewables, we also support clean cooking, e-mobility is now coming. There is, in most of these models, there's environmental benefits, but there's climate change relevance. You either reduce emissions or you support adaptation. For example, when you help farmers pump water or allow for cooling of produce based on energy that is now available. By the way, those are things also where it becomes locally relevant, very relevant, straight away. What I do want to say is that we have always argued, and I always argue with, it needs to be better energy supply and cheaper in most cases. That's the thing now. I never argue so much with the green aspect of it. I argue with the reliability and with the cost aspect of it. There are then also, and that's another important aspect, there are ways and means how you really can ensure that there are local benefits. One, it's a choice of business models. Certain models, for example, electrifying rural places, electrifying health centers, enabling productive use of farmers or of others, immediately lead to local benefits. And one can prioritize and create some special emphasis on such kind of business cases. What I hope for and what I'm optimistic about is that the discourse on greening finance brings simply more capital into the clean energy space, because that's what clean energy is about. That's what the president also was yesterday talking about. What my concern still is that, yes, there is some work to be done on the side of getting companies ready for that capital, but the capital also needs to be ready for those companies. And I will emphasize that, again, we have some work to do here. And I'm, however, optimistic that we're on the right track.
And for Jan William, is there room for concessional terms to sort of incentivize other fund managers or partners who would be carrying the green agenda from an EIB perspective? So can FMO ride on that and get a bit more concessional benefits from the EIB as a partner?
Or
yeah, let's start with that at a high level from your balance sheet.
Yeah.
How do we unlock green financing benefits?
Well, I mean, I think there's a huge potential in the private sector, in fact, to jump into this space. So aside from concessional financing, where you provide investment grants and you blend it with loans, we're close to signing an agreement with the Kenyan government on a technical assistance program called EGRE, which in fact will help the Ministry of Energy launch and produce tender documentation for auctioning IPPs. I think there's a huge potential in that space because we are talking about green. You mentioned green hydrogen. There's a lot of hype about green hydrogen, but of course this only can really be viable if there's an excess capacity of green energy. And though Kenya has a huge potential, it's untapped. The base load, I think, will soon. I think in the next half year or so, there will just be enough base load just for power supply, let alone using it for green hydrogen. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. In the private sector, certainly with IPPs, they have an important role to play, and the bank has every intention in supporting that movement. There's also a lot of talk about Lake Turkana, the initial projects being expensive in terms of feed-in tariffs, but we've learned also in Europe that the pilot project is always going to be you need to build the market, and as the market becomes more mature, prices come down, and this is what we are betting on, and certainly also in utilizing green hydrogen for alternative fuels.
All right. I want to see if I have a question from someone in the room before we can wrap up. Yes, please state your name and organization.
Thank you. I'm Pio Spagnolo, I'm the director of Terrasafi. There was a mention regarding a component of impact for investments. As an entrepreneur, it's difficult sometimes to find a balance between showing high profitability to make an investment appealing for an investor, and also the impact that is project or company is having in as an investment. Yeah.
Prioritize impact or profitability when seeking funding from you? We can go with Femke and then Manix.
This microphone, it's working, yeah. No, I think for us it's really clearly impact first. So we're looking at the impact on job creation, on whether living wages are paid, so not only creating jobs, but also good quality jobs. It's not just the fact of creating jobs. So for us that's important, and also on CO2. But it's not a black and white matter. It's actually you're starting somewhere and you're working towards improvements over time. You know, and we try to measure that and follow up and provide also assistance to get to that point where actually you do work towards paying living wage or having, you know, a CO2 reduction or carbon strategy in place or decarbonization strategy in place. So it's not just from the start. I think that is important to mention. But in the end, for us, it's really the impact first, which is important. Profitability, of course, comes. Without profit, you can't run your business. So that's pretty obvious. But yeah, for us, this is quite important.
I agree. What we hear from the financiers is it's a bit obvious. They want to see their money back, yeah, as a minimum. Yeah, that said, impact is important. Most of the financiers that we are working with, they have been set up with a specific purpose in mind. And in fact, most of the funding that we provide access to is blended finance. It's very few of the young markets are really ready for commercial financing. However, it's important to unpack this a little bit. What we, again, from my sector experience, people think energy is energy. It's not. There are many different models in there. Some of them, for example, C&I, so that's basically commercial or industrial users wanting to have their own energy supply. That is very viable in most scenarios right now and can be commercially funded in most scenarios. But electrifying rural villages and rural communities is hard. And it needs subsidies. And it will need subsidies for the foreseeable future. But there are also subsidies programs. So it's a mix of both.
From her, I think my time is up. Well, I have... Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes, yes, you can. Okay. My name is Christopher. I work with Gentleman's company, a garbage collection company, where we do recycling of waste. And I have two issues. We're already dealing with the local banks, and the interest rate is very high. So maybe, Michael, if you can tell us what is bankable, so that maybe we can see how we can get to you. Number two, Madam, I feel like walking out of the room, because when you tell me that for you to fund me, I have to know a Dutch. Imagine if I come to your house and how do I even access your house? I think you need to let us know how we can access these finances easily, because from the way you put it, it's like
I've asked that question many times, and the simple answer that I get is bankable is what the respective banker that you're talking to is willing to give you money for. Yeah? And that means that they need to have reasonable confidence that they get their money back, and they will set an interest rate as a price corresponding. So that's in a nutshell, it is not that simple. For the question with local currency, local banks, and a high interest rate, that's of course the scenario in most cases. But and maybe one of the colleagues from the DFI can elaborate on that. You have credit lines is an established tool of DFIs, and they can also help reduce the interest rates. But this is not my territory. This is rather you. Do you want to? Or?
Well, I mean, yeah, I can confirm that in the area that you are working in, that there are specialized programs or credit lines targeting certain sectors that do help to de-risk some of the exposure that the banks feel they would have with a company such as yours. I'm not saying that you have a risky company, but just as example, that would help de-risk their, allowing them to actually take this, provide. That's banks also need to. Well, we provide technical assistance programs as well for banks to understand how to monetize that risk, or how to assess that risk, and how to, because what banks are not doing enough, probably local banks, and we've got the Green Gateway program initiative financed by the German government, is to help banks assess what their real climate risk exposure is. So they have their current portfolio, they have a lot of climate risk that is not priced, because they simply are not, I'm not saying all banks, but many of the tier 2, tier 3 banks certainly have a long way to go in terms of assessing their climate risk. On the same side, of course, they have a lot of, need a lot of capacity to assess the opportunities of companies that deal with climate adaptation or climate mitigation, or working in the circular economy space. Because often they may be perceived as high risk, but may not be so. But I think you wanted any questions to use.
Well, you addressed it very well, and I have to say, it's part of our mandate. We are set up to work with, Dutch companies who want to invest abroad, and for us, it's not possible to work directly with your company. That is a fact. We cannot, But I think, our mother company, FMO, is providing those facilities to, make sure that local banks can provide that role, and therefore, if you want to access that, I would, there's the banks here, they're working with Equity Bank, for example, but also other banks. And I think that's the best way where you could just go to talk with them. We can't resolve high interest rates in Kenya, That is a local issue. I wish I could, but that's what it is. We can't resolve that, but I do agree with you. Access to finance has so many aspects, and that makes it really challenging. So we're trying to work on solutions on all different fronts, but we haven't cracked the nut yet, unfortunately. So, but Marnix, can you say a few words on the banks you work with here in Kenya?
Yes, sure, happy to. And I must say I'm very happy with this question, because what is a high interest rate? I see some of the assets finance companies when you buy Boda Boda and run it might be interest rates of in excess of 60%. If you go as a government to the bond market, it's not even a quarter of that. So you will be somewhere in between, I guess. What is important to see is, where are the market gaps? Why is the bank not able to assess your credit on the right basis? And they come from and then look at track record, of course. Perhaps you're a young company. Perhaps you're not 10 years or 5 years or 3 years profitable. Perhaps you are. So and have you been with the same bank for a long time? Have they seen you grow? Do you have that familiarity? And there, as I said, we work with banks that come from the top and help them to go down. And we work, like for instance, Equity Bank, and we work with banks that were former microfinance institutions and have now come up as a bank. For instance, Syrian Bank or INM Bank. Who are moving up with their clients. So somewhere there, and there we look at which parts of the clientele are not serviced properly. And we have found that young entrepreneurs are at a disadvantage. Women entrepreneurs are at a disadvantage in this country, also because of the law. For instance, who is entitled to land and who can have the ownership of land. And we also see that rural entrepreneurs are at a disadvantage towards urban entrepreneurs because there's just not as many financing sources in the countryside as in the big cities. So for those programs, we give this credit risk guarantee to banks under our Nazira program to help mitigate the credit risks on specific entrepreneurs, which they have to list and report on, so that they have a credit risk mitigant and can translate that into a lower rate for those specific entrepreneurs. So that's how we try to address the gaps that are still there in the market.
They're asking me to wrap up, so please make it short.
Probably your bank also would need somebody to help them understand and correctly deal with your type of business. That's what we see also in our sector, that banks, local banks, commercial banks are simply not familiar with this. Some form of capacity development and training needed, but that's what the DFIs normally do, is together with their, let's say, technical assistance programs, together with the credit lines or the guarantee mechanisms. And it's unfortunate your bank doesn't have that, so sorry about that.
I think what we will wrap up with this is there's a lot of capital available. It's moving towards being sustainable, so something to have in mind as entrepreneurs. And I'd just like to take this chance to thank the panelists for your insights and guidance. As a Kenyan, my challenged when with Dutch-based businesses, and my challenge is, what is the Kenyan equivalent of her company? So that's my assignment as an ecosystem enabler, to find and invest international Kenya. That probably mandates me to work with local companies to look for market someplace else, and then maybe I can get funding from FMO. Ladies and gentlemen, have a good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed the session. Hopefully the panelists are around for more questions, but for now I hand it to Robert. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Eva Vagiria, to Femke Bos, to Marnix Montfort, to Jan-Willem Leur, to Mikkel Frans for this very interesting discussion. Give them just another round of applause because they did really well for us. Thank you so much. One of the abbreviations that you have heard floating around a little bit in this discussion and in previous discussion in this EU-Kenya Business Forum is the EFSD+. Now, that is not self-evident what that stands for, but now we will have an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into the European Fund for Sustainable Development during a short while, and I invite Ivana Stanojevic from the EU Commission in Brussels to give a little bit of a background and how it works in practice. Welcome very much here, Ivana.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Just a little so you get in front of.
I think that's okay.
So that people see you.
As long as we have the presentation. Thanks very much, Robert, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, good there. I'm very glad we had this panel before, and we had the very concrete examples and discussions about the EFSD guarantees already, so that it gave you already an insight as to what kind of instruments you're talking about. We can move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So indeed, the European Fund for Sustainable Development kick-started back in 2017. The amount the guarantee amount and the capacity was 1.5 billion. And in the essence, that's the guarantee scheme that aims to stimulate investments in our private countries and de-risk, basically mitigate risks. That's the main focus. Globally, the EFSD is one of the biggest and largest public guarantee programs in support to the development and mobilizing private sector. The ambition here, so with this instrument, is to go beyond the traditional ways that us as a donor, the Commission, were used to, i.e. the grants, the blending facilities. We know what the global market needs are. We talk about the trillions, so how do we get to those figures? How do we leverage? So we need to go into more innovative ways of financing to satisfy that global market needs and to achieve the level of, we can still go back to the, sorry, first slide. And then to achieve the expected results globally. Because globally today, under today is 21-27, the multi-annual financial framework, we talk about the EFSD plus 40 billion guarantee, which consists of the open architecture, how we call it, 13 billion, and then 27 billion is a sovereign lending guarantee that is implemented by the EIB. So we have two components under the EFSD plus, and then again, as we said, we are transitioning as a Commission from that grant or a subsidy mode to go into something more attractive to basically attract and crowd in private sector and to provide for that additional or initial equity that the project needs to get off the ground. We would then, in this case, cover for any potential losses that would occur on the obligations and if the borrower defaults. So that's the key element. Now this, as you can see, it says it's complemented by the TA and the investment environment, and I talked about it. It's a very important addition to this financial pillar, which is the advisory services, the TA that are needed for those programs to get implemented. So very often our implementing partners start with that element, and this is very often the complementary element of those programs. They need them to get off because many of them need to prepare the ground for it, need the capacity building in the local banks, but then also enabling investment climate. In the environment is also an important element. While there is an appetite and potentially business case in some countries, there is no real, there is still some work to be done and the dialogue on different levels to enable the environment for those kind of instruments to get implemented. Next slide, please. So the 13 billion that I have mentioned in open access guarantees, that is what we have under the EFSD plus. Those guarantee instruments or tools are to be implemented via the EFIs, so our IFIs, our partner development finance institutions, that then of course mobilize their funds, but also with other co-lenders. The idea is that they bring in other co-lenders, private sector, to crowd in private sector and then achieve that leverage effect. And this is what we expect, and this is the main feature of the guarantee, why we would go ahead with such an instrument. It is because indeed the high leverage effect is expected, and also that's one of the main arguments that we're using in favor of using those instruments. If we go to the next slide, please. We have here the list of, notably, you recognize some of our main partners that we are working with and implementing those instruments. So notably EIB, AFD, FMO, KfW, COFIDES, even IFC, and then a number of new partners as well that we have under the FSD. And those as well, like FinFund, IFU, BGK, also UNCDF, Cardano Development, and so on. So there are a number of new partners that will be doing those instruments for the first time in this new cycle of the FSD Plus. Where do we intervene, in which areas, and what kind of cover do we provide with those guarantees? Because we do target with the guarantees certain areas, certain policy, key policy areas actually, which are defined as the investment windows. So we operate through those investment windows under which the guarantees are provided to a pipeline of the investment project proposed by IFIs, and notably you could see that's our study point basically. We define policy priorities. Some of the windows we had under the FSD, there are some new windows. Of course, connectivity that now consists of 3 elements: the energy, transport, digital, a lot of MSME financing that we already had, but also agriculture, sustainable cities, human development. So the 6 areas that actually feed then into the strategic priorities of the Commission. So this is the starting point, the response of all those instruments to those key priority areas. And then also, if you look at on the right-hand side, a bit of a characteristics of that guarantee product, which is a high flexibility. That means we call it an open architecture because there is a lot of flexibility in terms of structuring those deals. We're very flexible as to listening to our implementing partners, what are the market needs, where do we need to come in, which kind of a layer of the risk we need to cover. And so we mentioned here different portions of risk that we are open to cover, first, second loss, third loss risk. We do have, obviously, in the equity, some junior exposures, but we also, cover comprehensive risks, different kind of risks, market risk, and as I said, there is a lot of flexibility in terms of how the instrument could be structured to respond to different market needs. This is a portfolio guarantee that's also been mentioned, and that's another important characteristic. It's been mentioned by the panel. That means that we define certain characteristics of the portfolio with our partner finance institutions, and then they can operate within those limits. We agree where the operation should happen, to which target groups they should be addressed to, and then that also helps them to have some risk diversification there, because there's going to be a variety of transactions, some of the risky ones, or that have to be balanced out with less risky transactions. But it gives them a lot of flexibility, because this is a risk-sensitive guarantee, meaning that we do get the remuneration for the guarantee. So there is some risk analysis to be done behind that, and therefore, for the IFI, it is also important to basically have those boundaries within which they can operate to implement the instrument. So a lot of flexibility, but it proved to be a very efficient approach. So the portfolio approach is something that we have seen with many partners, where we could, in emergency situations like COVID, could easily adapt the instrument to have them quickly deploy. And we have precisely FMO, EIB, concrete examples where we have done it on the access to finance, on the Nazira and other guarantees, which then were having a quick deployment during the debt crisis time of COVID. So with a few relaxing criteria that we had to introduce, we could basically quickly deploy and implement the instrument. Next slide, please. And this is again the fee that I have mentioned towards the of all those guarantees and the windows, how then they feed back all of them to the global gateway in the core of our strategic deliverable, and then the Green Deal, notably jobs and inclusive growth. So there are many interlinkages, but all of those policy priorities that come from our programming for the priorities on the ground feed back to the strategic orientations of the FSD+. The result of this first call that we that was mentioned actually on the FSD Plus last year, we have got the results in July last year. You can see notably oversubscription of over 4 times, so the call of 6 billion, we have got 71 proposed investment programs, so guaranteed tools, with the amount of almost 22 billion. So there is obviously a huge appetite for such an instrument, and this is how we see them in response to different investment windows, notably a lot in connectivity and MSME financing, but also in other windows, and many cross-cutting, specifically many that fall under sustainable finance would also cover other windows as well. So notably an enormous, and that's the result of the first call. We'll be having a second call as well, because the overall amount is 13 billion. So we're going to have a chance as well in a couple of years to see how the first phase goes, if we manage to quickly contract and have the instruments up and running. Otherwise, we can do the adjustments and launch the second call This is a bit the assessment methodology, just to give you an idea what are our priorities when we have assessed, and this is what we have been doing since the call last 6 months, and which areas have been looked at when selecting all those guarantee tools. So I was already mentioning, we start from a policy priorities. We see what is the response of the guarantee tool in terms of the policies, TIs on the ground, regional TIs, strategic guidelines, where does it fit? And then also in terms of geographies, because now EFSD Plus is a global tool, it covers basically, apart from Africa and your neighborhood, all other countries globally. And then we go into the additionality, so the guarantee tools had to prove that they need indeed the guarantee, and the operations downstream wouldn't be able to materialize without us backing it up. And then there is a risk element and the financial structure. As I said, we have a defined risk appetite, meaning that that's an important element when assessing those tools, as we had to balance that out with the policy deliverables and make sure we remain within our defined risk appetite. This is a bit of a repetition, but again, just to flag out the importance of the sectors like health, digital, transport, education, climate, obviously, and all of that feeds into the global gateway and into the priorities under the windows that we have mentioned. And then just as an overview, a quick overview in terms of where those first 40 guarantee tools have landed, and a bit of a distribution amongst the IFIs in different regions. So 40 proposals and 40 guarantee tools have been approved and endorsed by our board, so we'll be going shortly now into the negotiation phase to start concluding the first batch of those guarantee tools. And then, as I said, we have sufficient capacity for the second call for any adjustment and if needed, and approving additional guarantees. And the next slide, please. And that's a bit the categories that we see when we have assessed those proposals, where they fall. But I think they were also mentioned on the panel, different kind of structures and possibilities that are out there. One is what we call the innovative approach, and that's a bit what we haven't done under the FSD. Interesting projects in the health, in the forestry, swaps for nature. Then we have a lot of equity, again, demand, and this is what we have done under the FSD. There are a number of venture capital funds, again, similar structures that have been done, typically fund of fund structures, and then responding to the policy priorities. And then we'll be replicating a good portion of those. We have the MSME financing, and that's the standard intermediated lending that was also mentioned in a couple of guarantees that the panel discussed, and mainly infrastructure. We call them project-based guarantees, which are related to the energy sector. And I think there was an example of IGF that was mentioned. So those are the four categories how we see or divide those instruments. I think we'll stop here as we're running out of time, so thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ivana. This is really comprehensive and well done for a complex instrument. Should we have some comments or questions from you? We have already a couple of ones here, so perhaps we should start at this end. Eva, please.
Super. Hi, I'm Eva with the EUKBF. Question I had is, does one need to be proposed by our implementing partner, or can they apply directly, and if so, to whom?
Should we take next question?
It was my same question. Yes, I want to see who will be the local partner over here in Kenya, or we can apply directly to you.
And where do you come from? Where do you work?
Yes, my name is Muhammad Iqbal, and I'm doing plastic recycling. So I'm at the stage of scaling up, and we have in our mind little big projects with the vision. especially for the green energy like pyrolysis. I'm willing to do it because mostly locally here they are pelletizing, but some of the materials they are not pelletizing, so we can do it pyrolysis. So we can get the oil and we can use it as a energy. So that's why it is a very suitable for us, but unfortunately we are not aware about the local bodies or local institutes where we can apply to get these opportunity from you.
We have another question in the back, please.
Yes.
Tell me who you are.
Yes. Afternoon, everyone. Joshua Tempati, my name, from JHR Africa. We trade in minerals and energy. Now, my question is, I looked at the value chain and I saw there were 3 steps before it finally gets to the finance, rather, finally gets to those in need of it. And my question is, how do you ensure from step 1 as the European Commission that it gets, the finances falls into the, sorry about that, and not necessarily have it swallowed at the end of the funnel by people who really do not need it, or people who are not interested in actualizing the EU's development strategy and development plan in Africa. Yeah.
Thank you, and over to Ivana.
Thanks very much for the questions. I think the question goes to our IFIs here. So we need to contract with the institutions that we call 7-pillar assessed institutions. So those are the list of the institutions that we have shown, and then they have their network on the ground of the local banks. I think some of them mentioned, and FMO mentioned a few banks that they work with. So that would be via the local banks that you could get to those programs and benefit. And I think that's what the panel was explaining on one of the concrete examples for the lady. So it's really coming to the local infrastructure, local banks with which they're working with here, and then you could benefit from those programs. And then back to the question, how do we make sure? Well, we have the so-called eligibility criteria that we precisely define in those guarantee agreements with IFIs, where exactly we want them to go, who are the target groups, in which portion they target which target group and in which country. So all of those criteria in terms of deliverables and policy, where the instrument should land, and who the final beneficiaries are, what kind of operations those should be, those are all defined in our agreement with our partner international finance institution. And then obviously, they're contractually bound to cascade down to their partner the same kind of agreement, and they remain within those defined criteria for each instrument.
Excuse. One short question, and then we will close this session. Welcome, sir. Who are you?
I'm Nicholas Ndeke. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the CEO of Zianga Limited. We recycle over 80 tons of organic waste each and every month and produce organic fertilizer and also animal feeds. But the question that my friend is asking in terms of when it goes to banks, for the past 2 years, my company is around 3 years right now, and for the past 2 years, we've been having really good financial statements and also employed over 8 people. But the thing is, I bank with equity. And when you give them that money in terms of the money to help us in terms of expanding and all that, they still ask for collateral, even though we have good financial statements, even though we even have contracts with eligible customers in terms of even them paying 50% deposit, they still come and ask collateral from youth companies. And one thing I believe that youth companies, although we can have startups that are actually profit-making, we take time to actually have those assets. We cannot buy land which is over 40 million so that we can give it as a title deed. We cannot buy cars which are over 10 million to give it as a title deed. And when he talks about how do you ensure the money that you're giving to these banks, they usually just intertrade bank, then they give you back after the time has come. So I need to know, how do you ensure that that money comes to us?
This is a really important question. Thank you for bringing it up. Is it possible for you to reflect around it? I know it's perhaps a little bit far from your immediate work desk, but
I mean, that's why I was referring to any of the banks to have the reaction, because as I said, for us, we do have those boundaries as to what the deliverables should be, and this is in our agreement with the IFI. They could perhaps from their perspective a bit explain then how that works further with the local bank, with their partner, what kind of arrangements they have, and I think case by case we could probably discuss, as the previous case that we had with the lady, which again comes also to the capacity building, maybe knowledge in the local bank, maybe different sort of people that you talk to, you could have a different response to. But I think it comes back really to the same question and the discussion that we had with FMO previously. Unless someone has anything to add from
Thanks so much for Ivana. Thank you to you for your questions and for having been part of this discussion. Ivana Stanojevic, an applause. Thank you. So now let us go into the next session, which is basically about greening finance. We call it Greening Finance, Kenya, the EU, our policies, and how we get there. And helping us to dig into this, we have a new fantastic panel. So I would like to invite you to step up. We have Mark Napier, who is the CEO of FSD Africa, and has a long history in understanding both the financial sector deepening as such, but also how you get to be sustainable. We have Olumide Lala, who is co-founder and director of Climate Transition Limited. He has been involved in Kenya in several rounds for helping government and civil society and banking institutions to work on their green frameworks and to build the capacity in these areas. We have a representative from the National Treasury. Please. We have Walter Muturi, who is one of the technicians who are working in the daily with Kenya's policies, how to set them, how to implement them, and he will help us go through a little bit where Kenya stands at present and where are the priorities. We have Dorothy Maseke, who is the head of risk and compliance at ICL Lion Group. So she's the leader of the sustainable insurance, and she's involved in the task force on nature-related financial disclosures. And notably, she has been instrumental in developing the Nairobi Declaration on Sustainable Insurance. And lastly, we have Amaury Chessot-Guibert from the EU Commission in Brussels, who can help us dig a bit deeper into what are the EU's overall policies and instruments. We have heard now about the EFSD+. That is one of the instruments, but it's also applied in different ways, greening finance. Let me see how I can put this. Perhaps let us move this here so I can sit. Thank you for joining us. I think we should start by giving the word to Walter from the National Treasury. would you like to say a couple of words about the priorities of the new government in terms of climate and green and SDG finance? How does that relate to the new medium-term plan 4, which we all have high hopes for how it will help us to green our operations and in our investments, guiding the international community, guiding the private sector on where to go and helping us to move ahead in this important area. Please, Walter.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to represent the National Treasury on matters green financing. Straight to your question, fortunately, I was working with the National Treasury before the new government came in, and fortunately, again, most of the aspirations the new government has regarding green finance aligns with what we had already been working on in the previous government. Particularly with regards to green finance, there are key areas that we are looking at, and we have prioritized them in the medium-term development plan, the MTP4, from 2023 through 2027. And basically what you are trying to look at is formed by the difficulties we've had with regards to bringing in more climate finance flows into the country. We have coordination issues. That's something that we prioritize in the medium-term plan 4. We have the need to create more elaborate green financial markets. This includes green bonds, which is something we'd already began working with, and we got support from FMO. FSD Africa helped us to work on a policy. Those are some of the things we are looking at. The green financial markets, we are looking at green coordination mechanisms, of course in the wake of the subnational and national coordination mechanisms that need to be put in place with regard to tracking climate finances. And also we have a need to track our climate finance flows, and that has been prioritized in the medium-term plan 4. We need to build an ecosystem, a data and information ecosystem, so that as we move forward and to attract more finances, at least we have a history of where our finances have gone to with regards to mitigation and adaptation actions.
Would you say that there is a new discourse with the incoming government? How would you say there is a difference, or do you continue basically the work that was started with previous government and governments? Would you observe any new shifts or details?
Of course, the new government is pushing already began working on. But of course, we have, Kenya is a signatory to the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. And those aspirations that we signed are still the aspirations we have. But the government, the new government is pushing for more green action or climate change action.
Would you make a few reflections on how you see the role of international community and the private sector? It's one thing that you work internally in the government. What is the message to the private sector in this regard?
With regards to the private sector, I bet the information I'm about to share is in the public domain. There is a green fiscal incentive that is currently undergoing public participation. We were supported by FSD Africa, Vivid Economics, UNEP Environment, And this green fiscal incentive policy seeks to see how we can incentivize the private sector to be more deliberate in climate action, and how they can get fiscal related incentives or economic incentives so that they can pursue climate action, especially adaptation, because that's our agenda. With regards to the international community, I think what we get most of the time regarding our climate action is the reporting mechanisms. And the national government is doing its best to ensure that we have a budget coding system that ensures climate finances are coded from the budgeting origination point.
Much for that. Next I want to turn to Olumide Lala. You have been following what has been happening in Kenya for some years now. And would you make any key observations on what has happened if you look at the green finance? What would be your first observations looking at the last 5 years? How is the request and the demand and the offering and the need for it in Kenya?
Thank you very much for that question, Robert. I think it would be fair to say that in the last 5 years, a lot of work has been done to create an enabling environment, both on the regulatory side as well as creating the demand and so as to boost the supply, if you will, of green finance. Just to give some indication, I mean, 2017, the Green Bonds Program was set up, which was obviously an initiative that was backed by FSD Africa, the Nairobi Securities Exchange, CMA, and even the CBK was, the governor of the CBK was the patron of this, and the Kenyan Banking Association obviously was part of this. It was a collaboration of a number of entities, and of course, Climate Bonds Initiative brought some technical assistance to that as well. And the fallout of that was that by 2019, we had a formal regulatory environment in that we now were able to launch the rules on issuing green bonds by the CMA. There were guidelines on that, and obviously, because even listing the products on the Securities Exchange as well was also done. So effectively, that if you will, increased the confidence in terms of investor. But the success rate of that was obviously the issuance of the Acorn Green Bond, which happened in 2019 and was subsequently listed in London as well. And so that gave, if you will, a lot of kudos branding and a lot of awareness to this product in Kenya. A lot of capacity building has gone into it by all institutions. But as we say, more needs to be done. I'm glad to hear that.
So tell us, what is it that needs to be done? If you could choose like one thing that you say, this is what we're going to start tomorrow, where would you go?
Look, the incentives that are coming from the Treasury, that's a good way forward. We're having this discussion outside just before the conference is how do you translate that to the real economy? How do you actually begin to energize the public, if you will, to actually start demanding for green type solutions? Jan mentioned earlier in terms of impact and you know, the prioritization of impact and returns. Well, if you look after the environment, you will make money from that. And if business actually choose to come up with products that make impact, then demand will go up. And of course, the government has its own incentive to drive that as well. So, you know, but people need to understand, I mean, the gentleman here, for instance, has a beautiful product. And it's rather, if I may say, use the word sad, that after all the work that we've done so far, he's still not clear as to where to go to for the solution he's looking for, which tells me that, yes, we've done so much, but a lot more needs to be done.
Yeah, because we know that in Europe and the US and in Asia, this is really, really happening with 1.9 trillion, if I remember right, USD issuances in green bonds, and $300 only last year. But obviously one of the reasons why we believe this discussion is so important is because Africa is so far not really benefiting from it. You mentioned a couple of successful pilots here and there. In Kenya you had a corn, but seen to the bigger global picture, we have still some way to go, precisely as you say, rightly say, to do this. Why is so much happening in Europe and almost nothing in Africa? What is the analysis?
Well, there are three things. Bonds generally are refinancing tools. They're refinancing products. And when you talk about green bonds, clearly it's data-driven. Yeah, you need to have the data to support the reporting requirements of the bonds that you're going to issue. In Europe and in the developed markets, we have various protocols that collect this data anyways for various things. Easier to find this data. We have a protocol on Africa, on the continent itself, to get this data. So data itself is one of the main issues. There's also a perception that these assets do not exist or are very rare. That's not the case. The truth is, we're just not looking in the right place. There are a lot of opportunities on the continent, not necessarily just for mitigation, but even for adaptation and resilience opportunities, which are very bankable. I mean, I can pick on projects or pipelines, for instance, that sadly the DFIs are actually investing in currently that could be exited through the capital markets. I wouldn't think of them at this point. I don't want to embarrass anyone. But the point is the opportunities are here, even in Kenya. And what we need to be doing is the DFIs needs to be working with the exchange, for instance, and the Capital Markets Authority on how to exit. And actually, rather than provide bilateral arrangements with these banks or these entities in the energy sector, how do you actually then become anchor investors in some of these instruments? I mean, if it's good enough for you to invest directly, well, if they issue bonds, then surely it must be good enough for you to be an anchor investor.
I would like to turn to Amaury, who is notably from the European Commission. We have heard in this business forum a number of financial instruments. We know that the ambition of the EFSD Plus is to provide sustainable capital, but you can help us to be a little bit more specific than that. Why is it a priority for the EU to be here in Kenya and in this region in Africa working on these financial markets to start with?
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you for this question, Robert. Actually, I think that being part of the EU delegation to Kenya, you know the answer even better than I do.
No.
But what I can tell you for sure is that there's clearly, we heard about it, the green finance and channeling more capital towards green investments, be it on climate or on environment, biodiversity, but climate looking both at mitigation and adaptation and resilience is something that is very important to understand from Kenya and from the Kenyan government. This is the result of the discussions we've had with different authorities, and it was also reflected yesterday by President Ruto in his speech to open the business forum. And so this is something that we're fully aligned with in the EU. This is an objective that, of course, we share. You know very well that we're very committed to meeting the Paris Agreement objectives. As was mentioned, so is Kenya as one of the first African countries to be a signatory of the Paris Agreement. And so this is something where we think the EU has a responsibility to help not only on its own NDCs, but also to help partner countries where it can in order to meet these objectives. And so, yeah, to answer in a nutshell.
Thank you. So how would you describe the EU's key instruments and policies effective to do this?
Yes.
How can we do it?
Yes. So we've been working on a program as part of EFSD Plus, which was presented to you earlier by Ivana, that aims at trying to build and co-create, if I may say, with our partner countries on how to help them scale up, in particular, green bond markets, because we see that green bonds is, in our opinion, a very important tool to start with. Hello? Yeah, something that the private investors also respond well to and are attracted to, so it's a very good starting point. And we're trying to work on a scheme that will look at both sides of investment chain, meaning both helping issuers issue green bonds and also helping investors invest in these green bonds, so attracting investors through anchor investment. And one thing I want to mention, so on the issuer side, it's really a question of technical assistance to be bringing to the issuers, to the potential issuers. And here we're looking at, again, a bit of all the different stages that can be supported. So starting from frameworks, this is something that Kenya is working on. Yes. But it's really important for us to make sure that these frameworks are suited to the local context and the local priorities. So this is really a dialogue to have, because we need to have both local suitability, but also, as much as possible, international interoperability, so including with the EU frameworks. It's very clear that we can't just copy-paste the EU frameworks in partner countries. We need to find a way that these frameworks are interoperable, but still fit the local objectives and priorities and context. One of the examples was indeed the focus on adaptation that was mentioned earlier, so this is clearly something we're aware of. So working on frameworks, but working also on the issuance processes itself, how to actually find the right parameters for an issuance to be successful and then to be replicated and in the market. And also look at post-issuance, so this is really a question of, when we look at green bonds, the need for monitoring and reporting, which is key, so the transparency of the instrument being key for, to be attractive for private investors. So that's on the issuer side. And then on the investor side, we are working on trying to signal to the market when they are in issuance that these issuances are indeed good to go into, let's say, attractive both on the green side, on the greenness of the issuance and the projects that are being funded through it, but also on the credit side, so the risk-return profile of the issuance. And we want to do this by doing anchor investment, and we're building a Team Europe initiative with several of the partners that you saw on one of the slides earlier, which is really working with the EIB in the lead, but also other European DFIs such as Cofides, KfW, Proparco, CDP and others, to create a fund that will invest in partner countries' issuances to send the signal of confidence to the market, and to hope that also local investors will be able to invest alongside.
We will turn now to the potential local investors. Dorothy, you... firstly, I see this timer on the screen. Let me say that I aim to pass with a couple of minutes, so don't let that scare you off too early to out from the room. Dorothy, you represent ICI Lion, which is one of Kenya's most important insurance companies. What is the role of an insurance company in making finance more sustainable? What interest do you have in it, and how can you go about, as examples?
Thank you very much. So ICI Lion insurance company or financial services group in life, pensions. We also do corporate trusts, and we also do investments. Our assets under management in excess of about 2.3 billion USD, closing at the end of last year. Now, insurers have an interesting role. We have three roles. We are risk carriers, meaning we are the ones who actually de-risk investments that have been spoken about today. And I'll give an example. We are currently leading on the risking of what you call the geothermal underwriting pool, and again supported by FSD Africa, who you've seen is very active in this space. So we actually carry on those risks. We are also investors, and that means we are actually capital owners. So when we receive the premiums, we invest those premiums in the capital markets. And so we are the ones who actually drive capital and have the ability to drive capital to the right places. We are also risk risk managers. And by risk managers, what I mean is we are able to advise our clients on how to reduce their risks. So for example, agriculture clients, insurers are able to tell them to implement sustainable or regenerative agricultural practices so that we actually support them, or so that again, we are able to insure them. ICA Lion has been a member of a number of task forces, and I'll start with the climate-related financial disclosures. We are members of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, the the task force on nature-related financial disclosures, and of course that NZIA. If you're a member of NZIA, you also belong to GFANS. Now, these are big names, and the truth is, for a number of years, we have been claiming and saying, you know, we are the first, we are one of the only in Africa. And we realize that that's not a very good thing to say, because climate transition will not favor the first or the only. So, coming to that realization, we decided to co-create together with the UNEP PSI, the Nairobi Declaration on Sustainable Insurance, a collaborative initiative to bring our peers together, to almost become an ecosystem enabler from a private sector perspective, and to say that we need to pull together towards the green finance or sustainable finance agenda. Proud to say that we are now over 90 signatories to the Nairobi Declaration on Sustainable Insurance, and basically signatories commit to a number of things. One, sustainable insurance thinking. We commit towards green investments, and so of course we are looking for the products, because those products need to be there for us to invest in those products. We are also looking at regulatory support and also, you know, influencing regulation. And it would be remiss, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that at COP27 last year, as signatories, we made a commitment that we are going to underwrite 1.4 billion USD worth of premium, or provide 1.4 billion capacity premium to underwrite floods, to underwrite cyclones, and basically to underwrite climate resilient solutions. And for that, we set up the Africa Climate Risk Facility as signatories. It's a 1 billion USD fund, which we are now looking for support on. And this particular fund is supposed to do three key things. Capacity building, which is a big challenge. Like I said, these frameworks, and as you've mentioned, are quite complex. So how do we actually understand and contextualize these frameworks to help us develop appropriate products and solutions for this market? This fund is also supposed to provide product development capabilities. And more importantly, and I think that's where Kenya, you know, for us and African nations, to provide or to support premium subsidies. So this fund, 1 billion USD, spread over 7 years, is supposed to support these three key things, and is a perfect example of what private sector has done to come together to address the sustainable insurance agenda.
Much. Let me turn to Mark. You get a lot of credit with the work you do. What is
Thank you.
And if you would also take the opportunity to outline one or two priorities going ahead, something that you think is really crucial and that makes you worried if they don't happen.
So, 1 minute, the clock says. So luckily for everybody else, they don't have to listen too much to what FSD Africa is doing. But and I would say, I mean, we've been here for 10 years. So I guess after 10 years, we managed to have notched up a few successes. But as you heard, you know, we do work on the policy and regulatory environment. And I really want to salute the work that the Kenyan Treasury's done on green. Really want to salute the work that the Kenyan Treasury's done on green fiscal policy incentives. We can work all day long on green bonds and everything else, but unless the economy is actually favouring green investment in total, all of that work will go to nothing. And so it's absolutely critical to get a framework in place in order to encourage investors in to the sectors that we want to see supported. We are about financial market development across the whole of Africa, not just Kenya. We have an investment fund as well, so we can do the policy and regulatory work, but we can also invest capital. We've been very big backers of local currency development in Africa, so African Local Currency Bond Fund is one of ours. The Kenya Credit Enhancement Facility, which was announced at COP, which again looks to provide local currency guarantees to project developers. That's the sort of thing that we can help to initiate alongside Cardano and other DFIs and so on and so forth. So priorities for us very much around carbon markets, which again is a Kenya government super priority for Kenya government. Kenya's incredibly fortunate in being able to have the right geology even for carbon market developments. But you still need to have leadership to support the development of the regulatory frameworks. You also need to have a financial sector that is supportive of the project developers who need the money. So we're very bullish on Kenya's prospects for carbon market development. We also are big supporters of nature and nature financing. What can we do not just through TNFD and other disclosure frameworks like that, but actually to try and get transactions into the nature space. This is a revenue earner as well as a sort of nice to have from a social and environmental point of view. So we definitely see significant economic potential in all of that. But maybe just to leave with the final thought here, which is that I think in the previous two sessions, we've been hearing a lot about the different sort of structures that we create in the development finance world to try and get the money nearer to where the need is. And that's and we need to do more of that. But we're very good in the development finance world at creating sort of pipes. So the money starts up here somewhere and then it goes into this pipe and then it goes into that pipe and then it gets even closer and we're almost at a project, but we're never quite in the project. And so I think we need to sort of reverse it somehow. We need to, instead of structuring sort of our activities around what we can do, we need to think about what the market really needs. And I think there is a real need, a systemic need for project development in a big way. And to the man who's sitting at the back with the project that's been trying to find finance, I wish my own organization could move more quickly as well, but we do need to think about how we can put in place structures that are frankly more experimental and more risk-taking around the projects that need them. So it is very difficult in these markets to, which are often new, to get projects to come to life. And so we need to sort of work with the regulators, work with the policymakers, work with the local authorities and everything. That's a sort of donor activity. We need to take that risk. We can't, as FSD Africa, do it all ourselves. We're doing quite a lot of it. And so I would love it for the DFIs and the EU to all come together and say, well, let's solve this problem of project development once and for all.
Thank you so much, Mark. I would like once more Dorothy, if I may. Let me turn to Dorothy once more. How do you see the linkages? Because what I sense, there is a tremendous potential, tremendous amounts of effort and money we have been explained now with the EFSD Plus instrument and with what international community can do. Do you see that? Is this sufficient to help a private sector, a huge private sector organization like yourself? Is it the right way to do it? Is it the right help? Are the linkages there? So we build this universe that Mark is trying to outline in his intervention.
Okay, so the linkages. Yeah, the linkages. I think the linkages are there, and having this conversation as we are today is good because in the past, private sector has been only talking about traditional products. And if as a private sector we are not focusing on the current needs of today, then tomorrow we won't have business. And so the linkages are so important, bringing in on board government and regulation and policy support, bringing in on board the DFIs, bringing on board the communities, because everything that we are doing is premised or based or is supposed to reward or support the community, because for us, the community is our client. So the linkages are there, but what we need is to talk a little more, and a forum like this is very important. I think it's also very important, and we're lucky from the Kenya perspective, to be able to align this discussion to government priorities, to align this discussion to the NDCs. That would be key, because if we're able to align, then of course policy support will definitely be there. I think the biggest challenge that we have from the private sector is capacity. We still don't know what this means. It's so far, in most cases, it sounds like a good to have. It sounds like something nice for your sustainability and integrated report. It sounds like something that now the government is looking at, and private sector is now saying, oh, okay, so it means we can actually do something about this. But more importantly, it's important for the private sector to understand its role and the fact that this is the business of not only tomorrow, but of today.
Thank you. So my last question before we turn for a very short Q&A, at least 2 or 3 questions from the audience, is to Olumide. How do you see the role, very, very briefly please, the role of policy setting? What does it, because we are talking the private sector here, they are not the government. Why would they be dependent on policies which are set by...
It's an environment where the business is providing the impact, but at the same time providing the returns. This conversation about currency would disappear, because investors will invest in businesses that is what they're looking for. So what you will find soon enough is that the people who are talking about hard currency will soon start investing in local currency, because convertibility will disappear. It's all about returns. So I think we need to look at how do we prepare businesses to the extent that they actually not just create the impact, which you speak about, but the returns that the investors are looking for. And the investors will invest whether it's local currency or foreign currency, because they will be able to convert it at a decent enough rate themselves.
Thank you so much. We are all very passionate about this subject, and some of us at least would like to go on a little bit more. But I think we're getting closer to closing this session. Do we have any comments or reflections from the crowd? Please, let me get it to you. Let us know who you are and what is your question.
So I'm Arti Shah, I'm the co-founder of CoRegen, which is a consortium on renewable energy, regenerative agriculture and climate, just a few of the world's problems. My question, I know that tomorrow there is the public consultation on the Green Fiscal Policy Incentives Framework, and I've been invited to it. I will try and get there in person. But how can we help you speed things up? Because when I read the framework, there's nothing wrong in it, right? There's lots of high-level, 30,000-foot level ideas. There's some examples from other parts of the world. But how it said, and what worried me is the details will come in the coming months and years. The climate is changing already, and I think there are lots of actually really good ideas ready to go into that framework. How do we help you speed it up?
This is the one. The closure of the business forum is at 1:45. It was at 13 in the original agenda, but that means that we will need to close down though anyway, meaning that we can't really have this fabulous discussion that we wanted. We really want to be at the closure of the forum. Now I get a bit confused. So would we do the most important thing first, at least, and that is to give the round of applause to to the panel who has helped us move forward. Anne-Marie, Dorothy, Walter, Olumide, and Mark. This is a discussion that will continue, and we hope to from our side to be there at the spaces where this is discussed in the future. And I'm sure that we're going to bump into several of you in many places. So we bring these questions with us until the next time we get the opportunity to meet and go deeper into it. And once again, thanks to all of you for coming. And the closure of the business forum is down in the big room, starting basically in very short moments. So thank you for everyone who have listened and everyone who have been in the EU Business Forum from our side. And a big thank you to our fantastic panel and that you took your time and shared your knowledge. Yeah, it was a bit.